Henry Kissinger, Robert Reich is writing about this over on Substack. Henry Kissinger was the guy, the war criminal, who promoted the overthrow of Salvador Allende in Chile. The Chileans had elected a progressive. Salvador Allende was in fact, he was a socialist. And his big thing, there were two industries that he was going after. There were three major mines and mining companies in Chile that accounted for about a quarter of the country's total exports. These were copper mines. And these three companies were American-owned. And so what they were doing is they were extracting copper out of Chile and selling it on the world market, and then keeping most of the money and giving just a small bit back to Chile for having taken all that copper out of the country. Well, Allende campaigned on nationalizing those mines, on giving them either to the Chilean government or to Chilean companies. And he actually, started that process when he became elected. The other thing was a company called IT&T, International Telephone and Telegraph. IT&T owned most of the phone systems in Chile. And Allende had campaigned on nationalizing those, because the service was crappy and they were just basically exploiting the Chilean people, charging them a fortune for lousy phone service. And Allende was like, we're going to fix that too. Well, both of those were the reasons that Kissinger essentially gave. He said, he said there's this model effect is what he called it. He said that if Allende has a successful presidency and he successfully gets these, the telephone system and the copper mines away from the American-owned owners of them and nationalizes them or even privatizes them with Chilean companies, that other countries around the world where the United States has a large presence and is actively basically ripping off those countries, extracting wealth from them, other countries around the world will look to that as a new model for governance and say, hey, if Chile can do it, we can do it. I mean, Kissinger was unambiguous about this. He said to the CIA director, Richard Helms, he sent him a letter saying, we will not let Chile go down the drain. And then 3 days later, in a 15-minute conversation with Richard Nixon, he said that the CIA must, quote, make the Chilean economy scream. And, this was what Nixon said, make the Chilean economy scream. This was the result of a successful lobbying effort by Henry Kissinger. He emphasized to Nixon, quote, he said, this is a quote from Kissinger, the election of Allende as president of Chile poses for us one of the most serious challenges ever faced in this hemisphere. And then he went on to say, your decision as to what to do about it may be the most historic and difficult foreign affairs decision you will make this year. It was 1970. In the days after the 9/11 1973 coup, this is the other 9/11. You talk to Chileans about 9/11 and they think you're talking about 1973, when the U.S. and General Pinochet, rolled those tanks in and seized the presidential palace and either killed Allende or he committed suicide. That's still in debate, and took over the country. And we were largely ignoring the massive repression that happened right after that. Allende was a fascist dictator. He came into power and he started rounding up people who were opposed to his regime in the National Stadium, torturing them, murdering young men, raping young women, intentionally. I mean, publicizing it, bragging about it as a way of terrifying the populace to go along with him. For 17 years he did this. He would take his liberal opponents in helicopters and drop them out over the ocean on the coast with Chile and publicize it. It's why Proud Boys wear T-shirts that say free helicopter rides for liberals. This was the other 9/11. Henry Kissinger is now 100 years old. He's still a war criminal. In fact, he traveled to, I think it was China last week, maybe it was Singapore. But he was somewhere in Asia just last week. I mean, he's still getting around, and he's still doing his stuff. Kissinger had had said, I think we should understand our policy, however unpleasant they may act. He's talking about Allende. This was back in '73. This government is better for us than excuse me, he's talking about Pinochet. He said, this government is better for us than Allende was. Right.